see lots of familiar faces, but I see some that I don't know. Is there anybody here that has not been to Travelers Rest before?
Me.
Look at that!
I love it.
So, Travelers Rest is known as the only archaeologically verified campsite of the Lewis and Clark expedition. There is other archaeological work happening in the world right now, and I expect at some point I'm going to have to say we were the first, but for now we're still the only, so I'll take credit. We always say that Lewis and Clark did not camp here by accident. They were brought here by a Shoshone guide named Old Toby, and Toby knew of this place as a gathering point where lots of tribes had come together to trade, for fellowship, even games. The Nez Perce, or the Nimiipuu people from the west, would travel through this area on their way to hunt bison in the east. The Shoshone from the south, where the direction that Lewis and Clark were traveling, would come up to trade horses with the tribes in this part of the country. And the Salish and Callaway people, this is their homeland, they would camp here as well at different times of the year to gather bitterroot and other natural resources from the land. So it's an important place for indigenous history as well as American history and also natural history. One of the great things about, I've worked in museums most of my life, but this is the first time I've worked in a park. And I love the fact that I can walk out the door and maybe encounter this turkey that's been walking around back here for the last couple of days. Or last week I was leading a field trip and we got to see a mink galloping along the side of the creek. It was lovely, and you've never seen anything like the rapt faces of 8-year-olds staring down a wild mink. It really, literally makes history come alive here. So we do a lot of different programs. I actually work for Travelers Rest Connection, which is the nonprofit partner of the park. And our job is to do things like field trips and educational programs and to partner with other organizations in the community, like Open Air. And we're so excited to have had Carolyn here for the last few weeks, and we're going to be sad when she leaves us. And it's just a great opportunity, too, for us to see how other people explore this place in totally new ways, and how they create based on what they've learned or experienced here, or how they interpret the stories here in a different way. So I'm awfully glad that you're all here. If you have any questions about the place, please see me or that motley crew in the back of the room before you leave. Our AmeriCorps members and park manager are here as well. So thanks, guys.
Thank you, Open Air, and thank you, Travelers Rest, for letting us come, for inviting us to be here. It was a bit chillier than we thought. It still is. We left 80 degrees, and we endured through a blizzard, through a midnight tornado warning in Kansas, but we made it, and thanks to Rick, the trusty chauffeur, we made it all. It was a first for blizzard driving and lots of other things, but we made it, and it's been a wonderful time here. I guess it's been 2 or 3 weeks now, and we've thoroughly enjoyed it. And we've gotten a lot of inspiration. We made a lot of new friends, and we've explored the countryside and the landscaping and tried to get some fresh ideas and something different. So here we go. I started out as a traditional quilter, and that meant I did blocks, traditional blocks that have been forever and ever, and maybe in new colored ways, new fabrics and everything. But I got a little bored, and so I joined a fiber arts group, and that meant that I evolved and drifted away from the traditional way of doing things and went more into a unique personal design aspect. And they don't look like my grandmother's quilts anymore. And I'm going to show you a trunk show when we get through, and you'll kind of see what I mean. But with the fiber art quilts, they're usually wall hangings, and some of you are going to say, what is fiber art? And This is what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to give you some examples, and then we're going to talk, and also the history of quilting. This is an antique quilt. This is, I believe it's grandmother's flower garden. It's a very complicated thing to hand piece and hand quilt. One of the things that really caught my eye was this beautiful binding. The edges are not straight, they're scalloped, which is even more complex. Why she decided to do it like that, and how she decided to do it like that, we will never know. I would have never attempted it. But the sad part about this is that my son just moved a couple of years ago, and I was helping clean out his linen closet, and I came across this quilt, and I said, "Where did this come from?" And he looked at me, he says, "Don't you know?" "Nope." He says, "Well, it must have been from Dad. Maybe it's from Aunt Mar when she died. Maybe she gave it to him." The story is that this is the backing. There are no labels. There's not a label telling us when this was made or who made it, and we don't even know how we got it. So, but the good news is it did survive everybody and everything, but you will notice it does have a very thin layer of real cotton, raw cotton as the batting. But you'll notice what I think, these brown patches, I think were originally white. That they are deteriorating or have been stained or something. And I'm a little worried about them. I'm afraid that that's not a good sign for them and their longevity. I think that if I am certainly no quilting archivist or appraiser, but I would imagine that these are probably made from flour sacks or remnants of clothing that, and I'm going to say that it was a she, because most of the quilters and still are she's, that she probably used flour sacks. But looking at the flowers, she carefully planned her flowers because she had enough of these pieces to make the entire flower. And when she didn't, she substituted. She didn't let that stop her. So one of these over here, I don't know if it's on this end or not, maybe she would have maybe 5 or 6 of the flowers and would substitute another fabric in there just to fill out the flower. This is hand pieced and it is hand quilted. But we have no idea where it came from.
But you took possession of it from your son.
For right now, temporary. He's an only child, so he will get it back. Whether he wants it or not. Along with other stuff. Lots of other stuff. Quilts are defined in the dictionary as a warm bed covering made of 3 layers. You have a fabric top, a fabric back, and you have some sort of filling or batting in between. And those 3 layers are held in place by stitching, usually decoratively stitched, not necessarily. Art quilts are using modern and traditional quilting techniques, but they're to create art objects. They're not for necessarily keeping us warm. Their emphasis is on design rather than the functionality of keeping us warm. Now, fiber art uses fiber and or textiles and many techniques such as quilting, embroidery, weaving, crocheting, spinning, all sorts of materials. But the emphasis is on the materials and on the manual labor to put those together to make this art piece. Quilting has been documented as far back as 3400 BC, but we don't really have any sizable samples to show anybody, for obvious reasons. Now, there are three general types of quilts. You have a whole cloth, you have applique, and you have pieced or patchwork. Between 1750 and 1850, thousands of quilts were made and used. Some of them survived, and some of them are even archived. If you look carefully, and I'm going to go back to this one, just think, she didn't have good lighting, she didn't have electricity, she may not have even had a sewing machine, and yet look at what she created. She didn't have a neighborhood quilt store to go buy the fabrics that she wanted, or even the color choices that she used. She used what she had, and she wasted absolutely nothing. She had to. She had no other choice. So when I look at this, I see love. Now, when we look at these quilts, we can tell a lot. We can see the textiles that they used. We can see the dyes that they used. Perhaps this discoloration is because of the dyeing process. This dye itself may be too acidic, and it may be disintegrating this fabric. We see the techniques that she used. And even, we might even hear or see a bit of history in some of these quilts. This over here is a whole cloth quilt. The top of it really is one whole piece of cloth. It is not pieced at all. Whoops, where'd you go?
Unplugged it. Technical difficulties.
Oh, it would have get way again. Come on now, you can do better than
Now, I don't
this.
know.
We would hate to fire you.
I ain't bomb.
Uh-oh.
Here it is, here it is.
Did you find
There it is. All right.
Look, I got a cookie on
Where's that? Where's that duct tape when you need it? It's not pieced. The decoration is absolutely the quilting stitches. But it's not just the quilting stitches, it's that they have puffed up or they have created the texture with the quilting stitches. They may have even corded some of this in here to make it puff up. They were popular in the early 1800s, and this was more of a decorative thing. The next one. The applique quilts were predominantly made between 1750 and 1850. You may have heard of a Baltimore album quilt. Those are applique quilts. They were made mostly by the wealthy because they had the time and they had the financial means to buy all of these beautifully colored fabrics. The lady of the house may have made it, or the help may have made it for her. These were decorative quilts. They were saved and they were preserved, and quite a few of them you will find a lot of those because they were taken care of and they were loved so much. The next one, let's see, yeah. No, you skipped one. Where's Sunbonnet Sue?
It maybe got moved. That's it.
Oh. Oh, well, when we come across Sunbonnet Sue, we will see Sunbonnet Sue. That's the whole cloth. That's the applique. All right, we'll just skip by now. This is a prime example from some of those that I do kind of know where they came from. I'm not sure if they came from my mother's side of the family or my daddy's side of the family, or maybe even the Coursen side of the family. But I have these. This is a trip around the world. And as you can kind of see, it is very planned, and each row has a different contrasting fabric. These pieced or patchwork quilts were very functional or utility quilts. They were made quickly with what they had, with available materials. She, like I said, she used what she had and she wasted absolutely nothing. Function, her family's protection, was her main emphasis. She used remnants, flour sacks, recycled clothing, and even, and perhaps, very worn out quilts or blankets for batting in between. I even had found one in the stack that we had that there was a pieced top and there was a pieced back and there was an old blanket in between. So you just never know. You know, she used what she had. She didn't have a choice. Quilts not only keep us warm, but they reflect the era that they were made in. Let's see, let's go to the next one. We can see the churn dash. Again, a very traditional block. You can see perhaps some rodents chewed into that little corner. You can see this block here and here that the fabric is deteriorating. And since it was red, I would imagine it is definitely because of the red dye that they used. Okay, then go to the next one, and it's a detail of one of those blocks. For example, until the sewing machine was invented in the mid-1800s, all of these were pieced by hand, and they were either tied or quilted by hand. She didn't have a choice, that's all she had. Once she got a sewing machine, that became a status symbol. And she wanted to at least piece her quilt to show off her prized possession, her sewing machine. Now, it may not have been electric. It probably was one of those treadle machines. Because in some parts of our country, only until the rural co-op came and ran those electric wires did they even have electricity. And that's even in my mother's lifetime. In current times, computers have changed everything. The sewing machine that I have is run by a computer. It's just a computer who happens to sew. The long arm quilting machines, some of them are more expensive than my car. You load the 3 layers, you pick out your quilting design, you mash a button for start, and you can walk away. And there it is. So, and then your fabric. Some of the fabric that you'll find in your shops are digitally printed now. My experience that the handle of that fabric is a little bit different from the traditionally dyed fabrics or whatever kind of fabrics we were used to before. But they're beautiful. Software can aid in your design process. So everything has changed, but that's okay because everything does need to change. Next one. The crazy quilts. The Victorian crazy quilts. Look at this. They came into prominence in the early 1900s in part because of the 1876 Philadelphia Centennial Exposition. The Japanese exhibition hall there featured something similar to this, and the popular magazines of the time publicized it, and it became a fad. The triangles and odd shapes were sewn together, and then the quilter used her imagination and all these beautiful embroidery stitches to cover the seams. They used a lot of silks, velvets, and brocade fabrics, which was a good thing because they made them beautiful, made them heavy. They did not quilt them because they were already so heavy. So they were mainly lap robes. The downside of those silks is the manufacturing process was flawed. And now they are finding that they are deteriorating at a very rapid pace. And it may not be long before we have no vintage crazy quilts left. Turn to the next one. And you'll see there's a little keep me in mind by the subtle power of fragrance is one of the sayings that she's embroidered on that one. So you'll find that, just look at that embroidery, heavy embroidery. But they, you know, there were sayings, there were memorials, whatever her imagination would lend itself to. That's gorgeous. Let's go to the next one. Quilters in general have been generous with their talents. You skipped another one. Number 9. Where is number 9?
Let's see if I can see them down here.
They've been generous with their talents. This evidenced by participation in their varied historical or political issues. No, that's not number 9. No. I'm looking for Nancy's border wall.
It's disappeared.
The border wall cannot disappear. Can't happen. He'll show up somewhere along the way.
Let me go at it another way.
All right. Like I said, the error of the times can be evidenced in the quilt making. Numerous books have been written about quilts and the Underground Railroad back during the Civil War. Quilts were sewn with a code hidden in the design. Perhaps it was to designate a safe house or a safe trail for the runaway slaves. During World War I and World War II, the quilts were made and auctioned as a fundraiser for the soldiers and the war effort. There's the border wall. This is my friend Nancy Goodman's quilt, based on the border wall. She is an extraordinarily gifted improvisational quilter there in the Mobile area. In keeping with the patriotic theme, the quilts of valor have been pieced and quilted by volunteers since 2003 and awarded to those who are serving or have served in the armed forces. And this is our good friend Pat Rudisell there in Daphne. The volunteers actually made this full-size bed quilt and presented to him for his service. He is a retired lieutenant colonel or colonel,
Lieutenant Colonel.
and did serve in some of the previous war zones lately. But I was pleased to have been invited to that presentation, and it was a moving ceremony.
Excuse me, I've got a question.
Yes.
Do you know if that centerpiece in there, is it printed, is it?
I think it is a panel,
Okay.
and then they did piece the corners.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding that oftentimes they'll have a volunteer who will who will piece the top, and then they will find another volunteer who perhaps is a long arm quilter, and then she will actually quilt, he or she will quilt, and then they'll have a presentation of several at a time in the community.
Thank you.
Through the centuries, quilts have saved lives by keeping us warm and have been given as gifts to celebrate life's milestones. Weddings, babies, graduations, birthdays, retirements, and even to express love and gratitude for a kind deed or for an extraordinary event. Memory quilts fall in this category. They preserve special moments by using photos or even t-shirts. And as a prime example of our memory quilt, Macy, Molly, Tano, for the last 2 weeks, we asked visitors, children, and staff to paint the quilt blocks, and my job was to make a memory quilt to be displayed in the classroom back here in the back. So this is the gift to Travelers Rest State Park.
My favorite is that Converse tennis shoe.
I know.
The tennis shoe was made by a reluctant teenager, if you can imagine.
What did they use, what kind of paint did they use?
It was acrylic paint mixed with fabric medium. All muslin.
So the kids actually created each one of these images
Kids and staff.
and stuff. They're out there, but that's delightful. Yeah, great. Great.
Thank you, helpers. Okay, so far we've been talking about traditional quilts, but things have evolved, and they continue to, and now we have modern quilts, art quilts, and fiber art quilts, just to name a few. This is a modern quilt. To me, they emphasize negative space, and to me, that means that they emphasize the quilting stitches more than the piecing. I think a lot of quilters, either they enjoy piecing or they enjoy quilting. I'm a piecer. But I had an aunt, Aunt Magaloo, who did not like to piece, but she could hand quilt like crazy. And she did up until 3 weeks before she died at like 93. Yes, ma'am.
Can you define peace for those of us who are not
Yes.
on the lingo?
You're sewing pieces together.
The top.
The- Yeah, she pieced all these little pieces to make one big piece. This quilter pieced 2 triangles together to make a block, a quilt block.
Thank you.
And let me say right now that I wish I paid more attention to my geometry teacher, because quilting is math and geometry. Triangles, circles, rectangles, squares. The perimeter of a circle. I wish I could remember those formulas, but
I have to say, Carolyn, in your favor, my son, who has been asking me when he's ever going to use that algebra class, I told him to come and talk to you.
I cannot add 2 + 2 without putting an X in there and make an algebraic equation. Algebra, I love. Geometry, not so much. So, the modern quilt is really geometry in its finest, and it's going to highlight those stitches. The next one, quilting has taken over and hit even the fashion house runways of the likes of Ralph and Greg Lauren, capitalizing on a collaboration with the G-Span Quilters of Alabama. So this quilt I found on the internet was made by Lucy Mingo of G-Span. I don't know how many are familiar with the G-Span Quilters. They're famous. There have been several books and several collectors' books based on their improvisational quilts. The G-Span Quilters live in a very, very hard to get to remote section of western Alabama. They were right there in the bend of a river, a very wide, I guess that's the Alabama River.
Close to Camden.
Yeah, close to Camden, and you really couldn't get there from here. There was not a bridge over there close to where they lived. There was a ferry. It was just that remote, and the river was so wide and treacherous, and so they have been isolated for all these years. And the ladies there in the community made do with what they had. They kept their families warm, and they made these quilts. The Freedom Riders, from what I have read, they give a lot of credit to some of the Freedom Riders there with the voting rights marches in Selma, ventured over there and saw some of these quilts that these ladies had made. And they were so unlike anything that they had ever seen. They bought some of them for next to nothing and took them back to New York and such places. And the fashion world and the art world were astounded. They have, since then, they have developed, established a co-op. They have tried to keep the quilt making skills through the next generations. And right now they have, this spring they did have a collaboration with Greg Lauren and his staff. They gave them the remnants of 10 years of his fashion house. They collaborated with what they were sort of looking for their next collection, and their works were featured in his clothing line this spring. And I can't remember, I'm not sure which house it was. But, so quilting is still alive and well, and even in rural Alabama, things are all the way to New York and back. But there have been a lot of exhibitions of the various quilters and their quilts from G's Men. Now Nancy Crow? Yeah. Nancy Crow is a very famous fiber artist. She's primarily known for her improvisational and her geometric designs. It looks like, with this one sort of going that way, she probably, I believe she's the one that doesn't believe in using ruler, if you can believe it. So she improvises to make her pieces fit to make a block. The next one. Susan Mogan is a friend of mine in one of the art groups that I'm a member of. This is an award winner of hers. She does a lot of, well, you can see a lot of traditional quilt block work in this piece. Totally untraditional colors. Look at the improvisational quilting or piecing that she has put in here. Yet this block here is sort of like a medallion or something. These things on a regular basis. So she's got all the art or the elements of art incorporated in this award-winning piece. And it's a pretty large quilt. Not necessarily bed size, but pretty large. And it did win. Speaking of large, Susan Carlson. I love Susan Carlson's collages. This is a crocodile. This piece is over 21 feet long and over about 6 feet tall.
I don't think I'd like that in my bedroom.
If you had it in your bedroom, I'd love to see your bedroom. But you can see that she has collaged not only the background, but she has collaged the crocodile himself. You know, where in the world would you find a design wall large enough for 21.5 feet long? So, and she has certainly not used traditional colors for any kind of a crocodile, even in your wildest imaginations. But her collages are famous. Yeah. She not only does, and she does more on value rather than color. And she does not only animals, but people. And but Susan Carlson's a good one to look up. Okay, art quilts emphasize design and are used in wall hangings. Oops. That one is one of mine. There's that one that popped up that we weren't sure that was even going to be in the presentation. This definitely is an art quilt because there is not a stitch in it. Where'd it go? No, that's Susan's. Oops. There's Sugar. Can you back up?
She helps hold down the quilt while Carolyn's working.
Can you back up?
Yeah. What number? 14.
Number 16 is the thread painting, and the one that I was doing did not have a number. This one. This is thread painting by my friend Linda Harshbarger of Auburn. It's not pieced. It's not, I think it may be quilted. It is wrapped around a canvas. Her faces, she's famous in our neck of the woods for her faces. And it was totally by thread. She sewed the faces. And so that's more of an art quilt. She's using the elements of art and design without necessarily the quilting or anything else. The next one is number 17. This is my friend Sherry Watkins. This was an answer to, I believe, a cherry wood fabric challenge several years ago to use their purples. And so this is Prince with Purple Rain. This is, so she has answered the specifications of color and choice of fabrics, and then she has used her imagination and the elements of art design to create this wall hanging. Okay? Fiber art emphasizes the material and not necessarily, and doesn't really necessarily have the traditional quilt stitching at all. If you could find that other one, that one that I did, if we can find it. Yeah, that one. This this one I did. It is the foundation is a canvas that an artist would use. This is loops of fabric. It is inspired by a weaver from Chile, and I wish I could remember her name now. But these are just loops of fabric that are, I guess, attached to the canvas itself. So it has a lot of texture, it has a lot of color, but it really has no quilting stitches whatsoever, and it has only the basic stitches and glue necessary to hold it all together on that canvas. So I, like many others, we can find something else besides looking at that one. I took quilts for granted for such a long time because they were all utilitarian at our house. They were stained, they were used, and God bless her, my grandmother really did not have much of a color sense about her. So they were not necessarily the most beautiful things I'd ever seen in my life. But I remember when I saw the prettiest quilt I'd ever seen in my whole life, and of all things, it was hanging in a McDonald's outside of Atlanta. It was pretty and with pinks and greens, and it was gorgeous. It was a trip around the world, and I had never seen a prettier quilt in my entire life. I got the bug, I fell in love. I went to a quilt shop shortly after that, took a quilting class, and this was our class. We hand-pieced, we hand-stitched or quilted. These 6 blocks, theoretically, are everything you want to know or need to know to make another quilt. I got the most masculine looking fabrics that the quilt shop had because I was going to give it to my son. You see, I still have it. Some of the blocks, I thought, oh, that's fun. The Dresden plate here is beautiful. However, I will never ever do another Dresden plate. So I learned a lot of what to do, and what not to do. But that was my class. Oh, let's see, where am I? So that was the techniques of it. I did a lot of traditional quilting in the meantime. This is a disappearing 9-patch. It is the simple 9-patch block cut in fourths and rearranged to where you can't tell that it was a 9-patch. Then I added the little pink and brown little things to make it a little bit more disguised. And then I like color, so it's very used. It keeps my feet warm at night while I'm watching TV. This one.
I'll come up here and be your assistant.
Oh, thank you.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What did you use for the batting in there?
Cotton. It's 100% cotton on the top and the bottom, and I like 100% cotton batting. It's polyester is fluffier, and it makes it a little bit harder to machine quilt. So if I have a choice, that's what I use. This one reminds me of Minnie Mouse because it's red and white. There again, it's the simple 9-patch with dummy blocks in between, and it was really so that I could practice my free motion stitching, quilting stitch. But with the polka dots, it makes me happy. Another traditional quilting, I believe I saw this pattern in one of the magazines, and I thought, well, this will be fun. And I saw this fabric, and I thought, well, I have to do something with it. And I did.
Love those hats.
Yes. And it sort of reminded me of, what is it, that's, when I get old, I'll wear purple or something?
Yes, yes.
Now this one, not all quilts, not all art quilts have to be with a straight edge. They don't even have to be finished on the edges. This one is the simple log cabin block. But I retired from the state with almost 30 years, and for the last probably 20 years, I drove the same way to work every day. And I got stopped at a certain traffic light and almost downtown, and I could look over to the right, and there was the most beautiful stained glass window in the church, about 2 blocks over. So after looking at that stained glass window, I tried to replicate the church and the window.
I'm gonna lose your dowel, watch out.
That's okay. It may be kind of stuck in there. This one is sort of a crazy quilt kind of thing. It is, the blocks are not stitched to each other. The pieces are not stitched to each other. They are actually stitched down to the batting and the backing with the embroidery stitches, much like a crazy quilt would have done. One other thing that makes this has a lot of texture to it. Another thing that makes it sort of different is that these fabrics are either dyed or painted by me.
I like your double binding. I like that little,
The little,
yeah, flange.
this, we call it Lynn's 1/4 inch because our friend Lynn Schultz showed us as a demonstration at one of our guild meetings how to do these little, I guess they're flanges, 1/4 inch flanges. And I've decided I really like putting these little, or doing something with stripes just on the, for little borders, just to give it a little bit of something. This is my attempt at improvisational quilting. It's colorful. That's all we can say.
Oh, girl, that's beautiful.
It's colorful. It's, I probably, if I did it again, I would have done it to make it easier to put together.
Can we show them the back? Because I think that is,
That's the quilt.
you can really see.
You've got the free motion quilting here, but then you've got the quilting to try to hold it all together in the middle.
It's very cool.
So,
So I'm a painter, not a quilter. So if you'll turn this around. And what did you say this was? What were your words to describe it?
improvisational.
Improvisational. Okay. So I've watched my friend quilt many times and put her thing. Did you make that whole design before, or did you make it up as you went along?
Each little piece I just kind of made, and then I worried about how to fit them all together.
Yes, yes. 'cause
And
you-
That was the really tricky part.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because you just started with the center and started sewing odd-shaped
Yeah.
pieces around it.
Yeah.
Now, you said if you did it again, you would do something different.
I would I would try to make my blocks more rectangular and not such odd shapes.
Well, but that's,
So they would fit
that's-
together.
That's beautiful and very unique.
You know, maybe I should have placed my fabric better to where it would appear that there was an odd shape. But-
the way to do it.
It was not the
Saying is
easiest
you
thing.
had a piece of fabric and had no idea how to fit that piece in. And then went, oh my gosh, why didn't I pre-plan this so I could have fit it in
Yeah,
better?
that was
But
it.
that's the creative element in it. It's
Yeah.
just absolutely charming. It's beautiful. It's kind of like being an abstract painter is what made me think of it.
Yeah, this one is just quilting the circles to make flowers. And it's really, they're not really flowers, it's just the stitching that makes you think that they're flowers. I know y'all are getting antsy. Y'all are tired of looking at quilts. This one, there was a challenge to make a donation to a charity for artwork to be hung in a cancer center. I made this based on, this design was the design of an Arby's window. And so, I love these colors, so I put them together. The project never turned out. They never got the funding for the rest of the project. It is hand quilted, hand designed. It is pieced by machine, but it is hand quilted, and it was fun to do. To me, it looks a little southwestern. Now these are some more of the art quilts or fiber arts. I rusted my fabric. The light fabrics, the rust-colored fabrics, really are rusty. And it really does have some copper wire. It has some copper wire on there. Some of you may recognize this little doll.
Sugar.
This is my sugar.
This is her mother holding the little Yorkie. It looks exactly like both of them.
There is Sugar holding down a star quilt, another traditional hand-pieced and hand-quilted. But Sugar, invariably, she likes to anchor them.
This is no painting. That's all fabric.
It's all thread painting.
I'm gonna come well closer, because, I mean, you can, I'm sure you can come up, but this is just.
This one is painted fabric with fabric paint. And perhaps even screen printed, I think, designs. This one was a group project. It was a slice of a photo. 8 different quilters got a slice of it. You could do whatever you wanted to do. This is truly a fiber arts piece because you've got deer hide, you've got a scarf remnant, you have lace, you have beads, you have a painting in pen and ink here. So the materials and the labor to put them together, not necessarily anything else.
And Miss Carolyn, which part was yours? I know you said that 8 people put it all together. Which part is
My
yours?
part was this one.
Ooh.
Bits and pieces and beads. I got into origami fabric. This is the Munsel's color wheel in fabric. And it was as much fun buying the matching or the coordinating buttons to hold them down as it was the fabric. No stitching except for to hold buttons. Another origami piece. Let's see, I got it upside down.
How would you know?
Because of the label. That was inspired by a photograph of flowers at Kew Garden in Eden. This is there on the Fire Hole River in Yellowstone. There with origami again. I quilted the back, and then that aided me in the placement of my squares.
Carolyn, this is the first time that we see kind of imagery start to appear in the work, at least in the chronology of how you're showing it. What prompted that inspiration? When did that seed for you?
I'm not sure. I think part of it, especially with doing some of these, it dawned on me before I ever knew of Susan Carlson. It dawned on me that the fabric was like paint. And all I had to do was cut out that color from that fabric, and I had my paint chip. So that freed me up mentally to where I had paint and I could do anything I wanted to do with it as long as I had thread or a button to attach it with.
I'm going to go back to painting again. Can you take this Yellowstone? Because this is perhaps what a painter might call plein air painting. As you have this tree and you have the river, and obviously I guess, is that what you're looking at? Is that what you're saying? We immediately started to see that image, that abstract image of where you were in Yellowstone. You might want to tell us, because we'll recognize that, I'm sure. But no, that was your intent as well? I mean, you said, I'm looking at this vista at Yellowstone, and now I'm going to quilt it?
And this is Old Faithful.
So we have a landscape.
This is at, yep, this is at Old Faithful.
Yeah, I think that was a good question. I thought the same thing. We both went there. We've been in two-dimensional.
This is my collage with our monogram.
Tell us a little bit about the process to make this. Is it fusible? Are you fusing
Oh,
anything on? Or you
I don't, because,
like that one? Is it
I'll
close?
just, no, because I'll take, I'll think, oh, look at this piece. Or maybe it does better over here. No, I don't like it over here. I'm going to put it back over here.
Well, how do you attach it?
I keep the Yorkie off it. And it will hold somewhat to a piece of muslin for my foundation. Until, when I get it all the way I want it to do, I baste every little piece on there. And then I free motion quilt every piece on there to make sure that it's attached.
Wow.
So you don't iron backing on it, stick it on.
I reserve the right to move those pieces up until the last minute. This is my first, I guess, collage piece of sorts that I wanted to look like something.
Wow.
It's applique, but the background is collage. It has dyed cheesecloth. It has French knots. I love French knots. I bet it has a zillion French knots. So meditative.
You got a bucket?
No, that's really a leaf.
Oh, sorry.
Art quilts don't have to be big. There's my pine cone. And the pine cone part is fused. Weaving a wool fabric, and embroidered. Some more, one flower, sunflower.
Is that applique?
That's applique. I'm not a very good applicator, but I love the look of it. But that one is applique. And French knots. Applique earth circles. I'm not a real brown person, but that one has lots of browns. This one is one from Yellowstone. The background is log cabin quilt blocks, and then I have applicated leaves, autumn leaves all over it. And the back,
You can see, yeah, all the stitching.
yeah, they are quilted.
Do you have a long arm? Do you do your own quilting?
I do quilt, but I don't have a long arm. I do it on the Bernina. And that's why most everything is this size. It's not going to be any much better.
It's not a king size.
This is my landscape from Blacktail Plateau in Yellowstone, on the way to Old Faithful. And this was the burned out tree right above Old Faithful. And you can, whoops, got it upside down again, I think. Yep. You can see the quilting on the back.
I love how that. You almost have to display these so that you can see the quilting too, like sort of double glass, because that is the trees that you just see them. Wow.
So that's it. I'm finally finished. This has everything but quilting stitches on it.
Tell them what your group in Mobile is doing. They had this building on a street in Mobile. They made a big picture of that, and they cut that in multiple pieces like this, and every person is quilting their part of that building, and they're going to put that building back together and display it.
There will be individual slices, but they will be next to each other. This one has paper beads, felting, painted with pine needles, painted fencing up there with the black. So, and this one is more emotional than anything else because I remember fishing with Dad. And that's where we live, is coastal Alabama. So, I'm through.
Very nice.
Does anybody have any questions for Carolyn?
Are those two your quilts as well?
This one, these two were the unfinished objects I brought to work on in case I needed something to work on. This one, the front of it, I think I bought at a white elephant sale at one of our guild meetings. But I went to one of our local quilt shops here and look at the backing that I got. So I have quilted it and finished it since I've been here. This one was a class, and I can't even remember who had the class. Had, finished the class, folded it, and forgot about it. So I have basted it. Look at the back of it. And so it is ready to be quilted and finished. So, maybe one of these days.
Kelly, can you tell us about your fabric collection at home?
Well, when we built our house, we built a room. I am the fat quarter queen. Everybody know what a fat quarter is? It is a quarter of a yard, but if you took it, a quarter of a yard would traditionally be 42 inches this way and only 9 inches wide. It's not very big when you want to cut it up and sew it back together again. But if you take a yard of fabric, fold it in half, you have half a yard that way. If you cut it that half yard this way, then you've got a quarter of a yard that's 18 by 22. So it's big enough to do something. So I have about a zillion fat quarters. I have some yardage. I collect it. I buy it when I see it, when I like it, because what you do not know is that the manufacturers, from what I hear, will only run a line of fabric designs for about 6 months. Then it's gone. If you didn't buy it when you saw it, or didn't run across it at another shop when you see it again, you will never find that fabric ever again.
Unless you have a husband that goes into the manufacturer found all the stores that it was sold at and started calling those stores. And it took him days, but we found the piece I wanted.
It's not easy.
It's not easy.
And there are some shops that are known to have older lines. So I have a lot of fabrics, and as you can imagine, I have a lot of quarter or a lot of fat quarters that might be a whole fat quarter, except for that hole in the middle that was just the right flower that I needed. So,
Did I see another question back here? Did somebody raise their hand? I have a question for you, Carolyn. Can you talk about your time here at Traveler's Rest? Was there anything that kind of captivated you, landscapes or anything that kind of piqued your interest that you think will make its way into a quilt? Or can you speak to that?
well, since I have taken some botanical art courses, I was hoping to find a lot of little blooming flowers to take pictures of, or maybe to sketch and to incorporate later. They are popping up and they are blooming. And it is getting warmer, so I'm pretty comfortable going out there and looking for them. So, in the meantime, I have taken a tour of the Zoological Museum with David and Stoney, and I was captivated by a stuffed bird, a dead bird. But he was the most beautiful dead bird I've ever seen. And so I took some pictures of the bird, and I mulled it over and sort of worked out something that I think might be cute and not resemble a dead bird, and but have his colors, and even have some deer hide from Montana to incorporate in that design to make it extra special for Montana. And I want to get out and take some, I've taken some pictures of the river out here and some flowers that I've seen. So I've got my eyes open for who knows what. You know, once you get the picture developed, or you get to see it, and then you let your mind wander, there's just no telling what might pop up, as we all know. But I've had a wonderful time here. Been a little cool, but I've adjusted. I mean, I'm not wearing a coat here inside. I've adjusted. And so we've had a wonderful time, and thank you again for inviting us.
Thanks, Carolyn. See, any other burning questions?
Tana.
I'm very curious, with these ideas that you get, do you sort of mull on them for a while and picture it perfectly in your head, or do you sort of get inspiration and start working on it right away and sort of put those details together once you've got the bug into the works?
You know, if it's a picture like this. This was the most beautiful picture of these poor little, three little struggling little flowers up on like Mount Evans in Colorado. It was starting to sleet when I took the picture and everything years ago. And when I saw that picture, I knew that that's what I wanted to do. So I blew it up and voila. That was great. Now some of these other things, well, even the tree. I knew the tree immediately. That was going to be great. The picture of this bush, I had to mull. I had to ponder. So I pondered it, you know, and thought, oh, well, that might be fun, even though it was applique. And, you know, well, what would I do, and what colors, and then more importantly, what techniques could I use that I knew how to use to do it, to get what my brain says it needs to look like, or I want it to look like. And truthfully, sometimes it just doesn't turn out like I thought it was going to. It just didn't work. And then that's when it's over there and folded up in a stack and probably will never be seen again. So yes, sometimes, you know, immediately, and sometimes you have to ponder and think about what's possible and how in the world are you going to do it. And then you have to go to the quilt store and buy some more fabric, just those colors.